Oh no's, hellos, and welcome back to another videos. And today we'll be taking a look at good old Exodus. Yes, Exodus is a set, and it's a set right before Urza's block. Now, the next video we're going to be doing on the top 10 is going to be in three parts of the Urza's set block. So we'll be doing it in three parts because it is a huge block. And it's actually going to be hard to pick out the cards because there are so many good cards, it's going to be really hard to kind of distinguish which cards I should pick and which cards I shouldn't. But anyway, on to the actual list of Exodus we'll be looking at now. So let's move on to the list, and it's going to be a good one. Don't you worry. There's going to be some broken stuff you're going to love. A love or hate relationships are okay in this sense because at number 10 we have Curiosity. Oh yes. When curiosity killed the cat came back. Because in this artwork it shows a cat that came back from, I guess, someone stabbing it. Oh my goodness. But whatever. Curiosity, or one blue enchantment, enchant a creature. When enchanted creature deals combat damage to opponent, draw a card. Oh, but it doesn't say combat damage. I must have misread that. It just says deal damage to an opponent. So Curiosity slowly started to see play in Niv-Mizzet decks in Commander. This can be an infinite combo, so you basically kill your opponent outright with this combo, because basically the Niv-Mizzet deals damage, you draw a card, Niv-Mizzet deals damage again, you draw a card, it keeps going infinitely. Or as long as your deck can hold. So yeah, this deck was kind of successful, and it still sees play today in Niv-Mizzet decks. It's practically a staple because it's just a two-card combo, and we all know how good two-card combos are. They're good because they only require two cards, unless you count one card, which was that pirate card, but they had to errata it so that it didn't do that. So yeah, whatever. Let's just move on to number 9 because you guys will love number 9 more than this because it's interesting. Because number 9 is Cataclysm, and not the demon on Geometry Dash, but the actual card. So it's 2 white white for sorcery, and each player chooses from among the permanents he or she controls an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a land, then sacrifices the rest. So yeah, I put this on number 9 only because of the effect of what it is. It's basically kind of like balance, because everyone knows balance is fair. Unless you're Thanos, which, yeah, that card is broken. Balance is pretty broken. So having kind of a balance type of effect on this card too can be also broken as well. But it's just, any card like this was, quickly elevated to higher mana or restricted. Doesn't matter. I think Cataclysm type effects, or whatever you call it, balance type effects, are still kind of broken. And Cataclysm is just one of them that is just kind of still broken. So yeah, Cataclysm, and it still sees play, and you wonder why it still sees play. It's because it's, wow, just a kind of, you just blow stuff up left and right. Really good. So good that it earned number 9 on the list. Maybe not higher. And let's move on to number 8. And everyone kind of hates this card, loves this card, or, whatever. It's City of Traders. Probably the best land you can play in a freaking Gitrog deck. Because City of Traders, if you play a land, sacrifice City of Traders, but add 2 colorless to your mana pool. 2 colorless with no downside, except for the downside that it has to be sacrificed. But who cares if you have ways to play it out of your graveyard? So who cares at that point? Or you can get a benefit off of it. So yeah, City of Traders still sees play today in some vintage Eldrazi decks, only to get mana advantage. I don't know if it sees play in vintage right now, because there are other better lands than this, but it's a very good card because it adds 2 colorless mana. It does restrict you that you can't play lands, but you basically get 2 lands for 1 because you had 2 colorless mana instead of 1. Usually when you drop a land, it's 1. Everyone knows this. I'm just telling you it because, you might be a net decker and you might not even know that. Holy crap. I just blew your mind. Okay, but whatever. City of Traders is definitely a traitor to the cities because I guess they betrayed the lands. So if you play a land, they're like, oh, that's your waifu. Get out of my sight. I don't want you. I don't want to see you ever again. It's like, I don't want you. Baka. Okay, enough with the weirdness. Let's move on, I guess, to number 7, which is Soul Warden, everyone's favorite Warden, because we all know Wardens are very friendly. But this one is no different, because it's the opposite of that, actually. It's 1 white for whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. Yeah, so Soul Warden, kind of like the Soul Sisters. There's actually even a deck called Soul Sisters. That is tier 1.5, but some people say it's tier 2. Um, and basically what you get is anytime you play a creature, you gain 1 life. Anytime your opponent plays a creature, you gain 1 life. Anytime you sneeze onto the battlefield a bunch of tokens, you gain those amount of life. It's crazy. And their win con is literally to sit on their butts and use Sarah's Ascendant or a Johnny's Pridemate to win. And this still sees some fringe play in Modern, but I added it on the list for the history of this card. Soul Warden was kind of a really good deck. It never saw its footing, but it was recognized as a really fun and interesting deck. The first one of its kind to be competitive and fun. And people actually saw this as a rogue deck as well. Kind of like the other rogue decks like Styx and freaking any of those other rogue decks that didn't really see like competitive play, but were still there in the competitive scene. And were really fun. So Soul Warden kind of fills that role because you just won with life gain. That's all you pretty much did. That's how you won most of the time. Some people even put in Felidar Sovereign to win the game faster. And yes, this deck does take a while to win with. If you don't have that win con, it's going to take a long time. So yeah, Soul Warden, just a very solid card and honestly, pretty solid deck that it goes into. So that's why I gave it number 7. And let's move on to number 6, which is a blue card, unfortunately, because everyone hates blue for some reason. It's Forbid. So for 1 blue for an instant, it says interrupt, but they eroded it to say instant. Choose, and let's just read the first part, which counters target spell. I read the buyback. Because the buyback is choose and discard 2 cards to buyback it. Basically, a buyback is basically you get it back into your hand when you cast it, or as it resolves. So yeah. Now, people would say this is just a really bad counterspell because you basically cancel with a little bit of upside. But there was a deck in Standard called Forbiddium. This deck actually relied on countering spells and drawing cards. So what this deck allowed it to do was get value out of Ophidium Eye, I think it was, or something. I think it was just called Ophidium, or I don't even know how to say it. And they used Forbid to lock the opponent out of the game from casting stuff. And a lot of people actually had the sideboard cards to interrupt this combo, whether that be non-counterable spells or whatnot. Because the Forbiddium deck was so good that it just blew everything else out of the water. The only decks that were kind of doing well was Red Deck Wins, which can kind of interrupt this instead. And those are kind of the only 2 decks, and that's why Red Deck Wins actually had to get banned. Not this. I mean, come on, man. You're letting them not play the game, basically. So yeah, Forbiddium was such a good deck that it kind of just relied on Red Deck Wins to win every game for this instance. So I gave it, I put it on this list at number 6 just because of the history of it. Honestly, that's it. It is still kind of a good counterspell, but that buyback, iffy nowadays. But with enough card draw, I mean, I guess you could do something with that. But I guess we have Rayman, so who knows? And who cares? Because number 5 is another blue card that I really hate, actually, and it's Mind Over Matter. So you put your mind over everything else. Mind over matter. But that's not what players do in this game. No, they don't put their mind over this matter of net decking because people just copy other decks and win. We all know this. So for 2 and a quadruple blue, yes, I said that, choose and discard a card. Tap or untap target artifact, creature, or land. Now, did wizards learn their lesson about untapping and tapping anything? Anything. It's just inherently broken if you do that. So, this saw play in Mind Over Matter combo decks in the standard of its time because you can infinitely do degenerate crap with it. Whether that be untapping lands with which we're going to get into, the Urza Saga, and other stuff like that. I would think Mind Over Matter is just a broken card on paper, not actually in practice. Because you might think, oh wow, just cast this and win the game, but it's not usually the case sometimes. The effect, though, it gives you is enough to actually do something. Like a zombie. The zombie deck, you just draw your whole deck out. With a Temple Bell, you can infinitely draw your deck out as well. With a lot of tap effects, it really came down to just card advantage. It's the same thing with forbiddium decks. You just had to get that card draw. If you didn't have the card draw, oh well. That's what Magic started turning into draw effects and stuff. Like draw was just broken, and that's why they had to print this because they wanted to make it more broken. I don't know, make it look cool or something. It's just Urza just being like that. Like I'm gonna be broken right here, right now. So yeah, mind over matter this because we're gonna mind over this matter because number 4 is even better than that. Okay, I'm gonna stop with that now. Number 4 is Spear of Resistance, and it's an artifact for 2. And this is the simplest text I could have got off online. Spells cost 1 more to cast. Basically, it boils it down into a nutshell. Every spell is taxed. So you may think to yourself, well, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. You're basically just, giving yourself like less of an advantage. Well, that's where stacks comes in. And there's actually a deck called Golos Stacks in Vintage. Basically, Golos Stacks boils down to is you play a lot of these artifacts that tax your opponent out of the game. And you either use Lodestone Golem or any other tax effects to kind of make sure that your opponent can't really play their deck. You can use like any other various ways to tax them out as well, like punishing effects like Null Rod. Or you can use a win con like Golos, which most of those win cons boil down to is just Golos for some reason. And they can free cast their stuff. Be it you have to pay 1 more for it, but you get to free cast it anyways, while your opponent has to actually do something. So yeah, it's very hit or miss on this card though if you really want to put it in your decks, but it does do some work. Don't get me wrong. Making everything cost 1 is pretty degenerate. Just for 2 mana. I mean, in any deck too. Like that, come on, that's just not even fair. Imagine copying this, or imagine just putting like 4 out. Now all those spells cost 4 more to cast. Like, now you're getting down dirty with that. That's just mean. And you know what else is mean? Really just skipping over this. Because number 3 is pretty mean as well. And it's called Recurring Nightmare. Oh yes. And number 2 and number 3 are going to kind of be the same thing, so bear with me. I guess we're going to talk about both of them and I'll transition into 3 and into 2. So yeah, Recurring Nightmare is a 2 black enchantment for sacrifice a creature, return Recurring Nightmare to its owner's hands, and then put target creature from your graveyard into play. And you can only play it as a sorcery. But who cares? You get to reanimate anything. So, you may ask yourself, well, what's the big deal about that? You have Exhume, you have Reanimate. What's so special about this? Well, it's recurring, hence the name. You could basically recur everything out of your graveyard, and it's insane. This was played in Recurring Nightmare decks using number 2, Survival of the Fittest. So yeah, we're going to go hand in hand with these cards, and I'm going to do it a little bit differently when I do it in top 10s. So recurring nightmare is the engine to survival of the fittest. What you can do is you could basically say, okay, I'm going to discard this card with survival of the fittest. Oh, and I should probably read what survival of the fittest actually does. And you pay a green, choose and discard a creature card, search your library for a creature card, reveal that card to all players, and put it into your hand and shuffle. So that's, yeah, you get to fetch something and then discard it. The problem is that you can use recurring nightmare to get a benefit off of discarding that creature. And this was played in standard at a time, and it was really powerful. And they actually had the ban survival of the fittest, and that's why I gave number 2 to survival of the fittest. And I gave recurring nightmare number 3 because it's banned in commander. But not survival of the fittest. I mean, there's another survival of the fittest card that can kind of do the same thing. So whatever. But yeah, survival of the fittest, or yeah, survival of the fittest was good at what fetching was good. So I gave it number 2 because it got banned first, and also it's a tutor effect. It's a really good tutor effect too. And I gave recurring nightmare number 3 only because it's just constant recursion. Although you got to pay that 3 again. While as survival of fittest, you only have to pay 1 green. So it just barely edged out survival of the fittest, but not quite there. Not quite. I just gave survival of the fittest number 2 because it sees more play, honestly, than recurring nightmare. It's just mana intensive, and might as well just go with the easier option, which is survival of the fittest. Not to get recurring nightmare wrong. Recurring nightmare is still a powerful ass card. So yeah, let's move on to number 1. Now, before we get on to number 1, there is, I kind of got lost in the history of this. So I'm only going to explain the modern day history of what Oath of Druids decks are actually like now. So yeah, this is number 1, which is Oath of Druids. I just said it, damn. Spoilers. So it's 1 green enchantment for this effect. This effect is just why I think this card is number 1. Over all of them, this just landslides them. So during each player's upkeep, if that player controls fewer creatures than target opponent, that player may reveal cards from his or her library until the player reveals a creature card. The player puts that creature into play and all other revealed cards into his or her graveyard. So yeah, Oath of Druids. So basically what you can do is you could say, my opponent has more creatures than me. You know what? I want to get advantage off of that. It's like, okay, let's start ripping through my deck. I'm all like, oh, I hit a Griselbrand. Look at me, I'm so powerful. Or I hit like a freaking like, oh, Elspeth, or not Elspeth, freaking Elish Norn. Holy crap! I'm like in the zone. I'm gonna wreck face. I'm gonna do stuff. So yeah, Oath of Druids, everyone. So yeah, the point of this deck is it's a simple combo. Now there's a land called Forbidden Orchard. You can use this to tap mana for any color, but there's a catch. Once you tap that for any color, you have to give a 1/1 spirit to your opponent. What you could do with that said spirit is basically give your opponent a lot of those spirits while tapping the mana. And basically, your opponent will always have more creatures than you. So what you can use for that advantage is you can use the Oath of Druids trigger to basically get the most powerful creature out of your deck and win the game from there. And this deck's kind of iffy nowadays, since now it uses more of a control style, and it uses Oko a lot too. But now it still stays to its tried and true, which is basically getting out a broken creature. And this deck still sees play in Vintage today, and it's just beyond broken, honestly. I really don't like this card because it just shows how unfair green can be with fetching creatures. And they stopped printing these type of effects for green because it just was way too powerful. And Oath of Druids just proved why it is. And that's basically Exodus. And yeah, it was kind of a history or washy-washy type of thing that I did there, but that's what the decks they were played in. There was a lot of interesting decks. Now, are they still played today? Yes, of course they are. Oh, why wouldn't they be on this list if they weren't? But yeah, they were played almost everywhere. You can find all of these cards played in some certain deck somewhere. So yeah, that's going to do it for the list of Exodus, and we'll move on to Urza, which will be a very fun treat and very toxic. So anyways, I hope you guys have a wonderful day or night, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, and peace.